Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. At dawn, I rolled up the gravel road to our old lake cabin, expecting peace, preparing a welcome for my son returning from war. But instead of silence and solitude, I found a battle brewing on my doorstep, one I never saw coming, and one I was damn sure going to finish. The sun hadn't even fully cleared the treetops when I pulled the truck and trailer up the gravel road leading to our family's lake cabin. The air was cool and damp with early summer dew, and the only sounds were the crunch of my tires on the dirt and a few half-hearted birds trying out their morning songs. I parked under the old oak tree where my late wife used to hang wind chimes and killed the engine. For a moment, I just sat there. The place looked the same as it did 10 years ago. Weathered, quiet, stubbornly standing, just like I left it. Except this time, I wasn't here for fishing or solitude. I was here to get the cabin ready for my son Alex coming home from deployment after 12 long months in the desert. The trailer was packed to the gills with his stuff. Boxes of books, a battered guitar, his kettlebells, a half-dozen frame photos from high school wrestling, a duffel bag of gear that still smelled like barracks, and the shadow box I had custom-made for his commendations and medals. I even brought his old punching bag, figuring he might want to hang it back up on the porch beam. I had a vision for how this place would greet him, a warm, peaceful retreat, somewhere he could shake off the sand and silence without being stared at or thanked to death. I'd barely gotten the back gate of the trailer down when I heard voices, two of them approaching fast. I turned to see a pair of middle-aged men walking toward me in matching neon orange vests that read Silver Shore HOA Property Patrol. One of them had a clipboard, the other a walkie-talkie, and both looked like they'd skipped breakfast but overdosed on self-importance. I was halfway through unstrapping the punching bag when Clipboard Guy cleared his throat like he was announcing a fire drill. "Sir," he said, "you're not authorized for this type of unloading. Do you have a delivery permit?" I blinked. "A what now?" He gestured at the trailer. "External furnishings, freight materials, unscheduled vehicle activity. It requires HOA clearance." I looked from him to the other guy, then to the empty gravel around us. "You do realize this is my land, right? I've owned this cabin since the late 1990s. It's not part of your community." Walkie-talkie guy squinted. "Are you Mr. Grimm?" "Yeah, Randall Grimm, owner of Lot 32. Except it's not in your HOA. Never was. I got the survey to prove it." They exchanged a look, like I'd just told them gravity didn't apply to me. Clipboard Guy flipped through his paperwork, muttered something about updated boundary maps, and said, "We'll need to escalate this. Please halt all unloading activity until this is resolved." I snorted. "You can escalate it all you want, but unless you've got a badge or a court order, I'm not stopping." That's when she arrived. Karen Dowell. I recognized her before she even got out of her spotless white SUV. Blonde bob, oversized sunglasses, and a matching expression of someone who believes rules are made for everyone else to follow and her to enforce. She parked in the middle of the access road like she was staking a claim on the asphalt and came striding up in heels far too fancy for gravel, holding her iPad like it was the 10 Commandments. "Mr. Grimm," she began, her voice already pre-soaked in condescension, "you're in direct violation of Section 9A of the Silver Shore Estate Covenant. This entire area is under HOA jurisdiction." "No, it's not," I replied, keeping my voice even. "My property was registered in 1998. Silver Shore didn't exist until '02. I never signed any incorporation agreement." "I'm not a member." She tapped her screen. "Our digital map indicates otherwise. You're within the adjusted perimeter, which was submitted to the County Land Board last year. You're not exempt just because you think you are." "That map is inaccurate. I've got the original plats and title docs in my truck. My lawyer's got copies too. You don't have jurisdiction here." She paused, lips pursed like she'd bitten into a lemon. "We've also received reports of potentially hazardous material being moved onto the property. Military gear, possibly firearms. Are you transporting weapons?" I narrowed my eyes. "That's my son's deployment kit. There's not a single weapon in that trailer." She nodded toward Clipboard Guy. "Call it in." "I beg your pardon," I said, stepping forward. "We're contacting law enforcement," she said, already dialing. "You've refused to comply with community enforcement officers, and you may be in violation of multiple safety ordinances. If you have nothing to hide, there's no issue. It took less than 15 minutes for the cops to arrive. 2 squad cars, lights, but no sirens. I greeted them calmly, showed them my ID, and explained the situation. One officer was polite. The other was younger and twitchier, clearly unsure what to make of the trailer. When they asked to inspect it, I let them, because I had nothing to hide. They opened box after box. One had Alex's folded fatigues, another had his journal. One contained a collection of coins he'd gathered overseas. Then they opened the case with his medals, Bronze Star, Navy Commendation, a few others, and I felt something crack in me. "Be careful with that," I said, my voice low. "Those were earned." After almost 3 hours of questions, paperwork, and calls back to the station, they finally let me go. No charges, no violations, no citations, but the message had been sent. My privacy? Gone. My son's belongings? Poked and prodded like contraband. And the worst part? Karen stood there the whole time, arms folded, wearing a smile like she'd won something. I drove the truck a little farther into the property, out of view, and finished unloading in silence. The next morning, I woke up before dawn, still sore from unloading and still burning from the memory of that smug look on Karen's face. I made myself a pot of strong coffee and sat down at my dining table with a stack of manila folders I hadn't opened in years. The original deed to the lake cabin, the plat maps from when I bought the property in 1998, tax receipts, a dusty survey map printed on yellowing paper with faded pencil markings from the county clerk's office. It was all there, just like I remembered. My property, my land, and not a square inch of it ever belonged to Silver Shore Estates. By mid-morning, I was standing in the county land office with a copy of my deed and the HOA's updated boundary map that clipboard guy had waved at me the day before. The clerk, a kid who looked barely old enough to shave, scrolled through digital records with all the urgency of a sloth on vacation. I pointed at the section in question. "See that?" I said, tapping the screen. "That's Lot 32, my cabin. It's its own parcel, registered independently. Always has been." The clerk shrugged. "Yep, you're right. Not part of the HOA overlay. So then how the hell did they get away with showing law enforcement a map that says otherwise?" He frowned, leaning in closer. "This version here is official. Anything else is just a third-party submission. Counties don't accept boundary adjustments without owner consent or annexation ordinances." "So they made it up," I muttered. The kid gave a non-committal shrug that said, "Not my problem, man." I had him print out the county's official plat map and certify it with a stamp. I made 5 copies, 2 for me, 1 for my lawyer, and 2 extras because I was raised to never show up to a fight without spare ammo. Then I drove straight to my buddy Wyatt's office. He's a semi-retired land surveyor with the patience of a monk and the investigative instincts of a bloodhound. I laid the HOA's updated map in front of him like a crime scene photo. He stared at it, then at the certified plat, then at me. "This is garbage," he said, jabbing a thumb at Karen's map. "You can see where they dragged the boundary box down the slope and right over your parcel. This dotted line, that's a projection, not an actual boundary. They basically photoshopped it. So if this went to court, they'd be laughed out of the room. But that's only if it gets that far. Most people fold when HOAs pull this crap because they don't know better." I didn't say anything for a second. My jaw tightened. I thought of Alex, thought of those cops pulling out his medals, inspecting them like contraband, thought of Karen barking into her phone, her self-certainty louder than sirens. "I'm not folding." Wyatt smiled. "Thought you'd say that." Back at the cabin, I got to work. The real kind. I changed all the locks, replaced the front door, installed a security camera facing the road and 2 more on the tree line. I printed a copy of the plat map, laminated it, and stapled it to a wooden post by the entrance. Private property, not subject to HOA jurisdiction. Trespassers will be recorded and prosecuted. I wanted it to be the first thing Karen's Botoxed eyes saw the next time she came sniffing around. Didn't take long. That same evening, as I was sanding the porch railing, a dark gray crossover rolled up just beyond the sign and stopped. The window rolled down. Karen, alone this time, her sunglasses off, her expression flat. She stared at the sign, then at me. "This is escalating unnecessarily, Mr. Grimm," she called. "No, Karen, what you did yesterday, that was escalation. This is defense. You're making yourself difficult. And you're trespassing," I replied, motioning toward the sign with the back of my sander. "That driveway's not part of your fantasy map." She put the car in reverse and backed away without another word. Later that night, I received an email, strangely formal, CC'd to a dozen names I didn't recognize, a violation notice. It claimed that my trailer and the unloading activity constituted unapproved construction staging. It cited HOA ordinance codes, none of which applied to me. The wording was dramatic: hazardous materials, structural interference, potential environmental impact. At the bottom, a demand for immediate payment of $450. I forwarded it to my lawyer with a simple note: "It's begun." The next morning, the garbage bin at the end of my driveway was knocked over. Random, maybe, but my mailbox had also been opened, the flag ripped off. I wasn't paranoid. I was being tested, and I knew damn well Karen wasn't going to stop just because I laminated a few maps, but I had a few more layers to play. I started compiling everything: recordings, the forged map, the fake ordinance notices, timestamps, photos. I went through Alex's deployment folder and found a letter he'd written before leaving, thanking me for keeping the cabin just the way we left it. I printed that too, because one way or another, I was going to keep that promise, and I was just getting warmed up. It was 3 days later when I got that feeling in my gut, the kind I hadn't had since back when I was a fire inspector and smelled smoke before anyone else did. I'd spent most of the day cleaning out the shed behind the cabin, organizing tools, and patching the roof. By the time I rolled the last tire into the corner and turned off the work light, the sky was already bleeding orange into the trees. I walked back toward the cabin with a satisfied ache in my back and noticed something off. The gate. I always chain it, even if I'm inside, but now it was hanging loose, gently swaying in the wind. I froze. The walk to the front door felt longer than usual. When I reached it, the knob felt wrong, too smooth. I hadn't touched it all day, but the fresh scratch marks around the latch told the story. I pushed the door open. The cabin was a mess. Not ransacked exactly, but definitely disturbed. Alex's shadow box had been moved, one of his framed photos was on the floor, cracked, and a few of his boxes had been opened and left that way, contents half pulled out. The bed frame we'd stored in the corner was now standing upright, like someone had been inspecting the floor underneath it. And on the kitchen table, in place of the coffee mug I'd left earlier, sat an official-looking notice in a plastic sleeve. Notice of HOA action. Unauthorized occupation of structure, vacate within 48 hours. My jaw clenched. It wasn't just some angry letter. This one looked like it was meant to scare someone into compliance. Big red stamp at the top. HOA seal, signature scrawled at the bottom, Karen Dowell. There were no signs of forced entry, which meant whoever did this either picked the lock or had a key. I checked the windows. No broken glass, just smudges on the inside. Someone had been in here, probably more than once. They wanted me to find this. They wanted to rattle me. I walked back outside, scanning the tree line. That's when I saw them. 2 small, motion-triggered cameras barely visible lashed to branches. One aimed at the driveway, the other at the back porch. They weren't mine. The wires snaked to a battery box halfway hidden in the underbrush, one of those ready-made surveillance kits you buy at a hardware store. The arrogance of it made me laugh. I didn't touch them. Instead, I drove to town, bought 3 of my own, higher quality, night vision capable, cloud synced, and spent the next few hours wiring them into the corners of the cabin and surrounding trees. Then I called Wyatt. "Hey," I said, "remember that time we caught that guy siphoning gas from your truck with a trail cam?" "Still my favorite arrest photo," he said. "Well," I said, "I might need a repeat performance. You still got those extra infrared models?" He dropped them off that night. Over the next 2 evenings, I waited. I didn't sleep at the cabin. I stayed in my truck, parked a quarter-mile up the ridge where I could see the gate with binoculars and check my phone for alerts. Nothing the first night, just a raccoon that seemed way too interested in one of the side cameras. But on the second night, just after 2 in the morning, the alert buzzed. I opened the app. There they were. Karen, clipboard guy, and a third man I hadn't seen before. Tall, built like an ex-linebacker, wearing gloves and holding a flashlight in his mouth like he was used to getting into tight spaces. They moved casually, like they'd done this before. They walked straight up the drive, around the back of the cabin, and disappeared from the camera's line of sight for about 10 minutes. Then, they reappeared, carrying one of Alex's duffel bags. The big guy tossed it into the trunk of a black SUV. I screen captured every frame, zoomed in on faces, license plates, timestamps. I called the sheriff's office, gave them everything, and waited by the gate until the responding deputy arrived. He was young, polite, but looked nervous, After reviewing the footage, he whistled low. "This is bad." "Yeah," I said. "And it's going to get worse." He collected the evidence and said he'd file a full report. I didn't push. I knew how these things went. Slow, careful, paper trails longer than rivers. But I also knew I wasn't going to let this disappear into some quiet drawer at City Hall. The next morning, I filed a complaint for criminal trespass and theft. I listed every item missing or damaged, from the duffel bag to the cracked photo frame. The deputy confirmed the complaint and said detectives would follow up. I didn't hold my breath. I went back to the cabin, gathered the rest of Alex's things into one room, and locked the door with a deadbolt reinforced from the inside. Then I did something I hadn't planned on yet. I emailed every veteran organization I could think of. I sent them a summary of what happened, a few still images from the footage, and a photo of Alex in uniform standing beside the flagpole at his base. I titled it, "This is what was done to a deployed Marine's property." Then I hit send. I didn't expect much to come from those emails. I figured maybe one or two auto-replies and some polite silence. But by the time I poured my second cup of coffee that morning, I had a dozen responses. By lunch, over 50. And by evening, my inbox looked like a press room. Retired Marines, Army spouses, local veteran groups, even a Gold Star dad from Tennessee. Some offered legal advice. Others just wanted to say they were behind me. But one reply stood out. It was from a field director at the Missouri Office of Veterans Affairs. Short and direct. "Mr. Grimm, we would like to investigate this case immediately. You'll hear from us within 48 hours. And I did. The next day, a rep named Laura Nash drove down from Jefferson City. She was a quiet woman in a navy blue blazer with sharp eyes and a federal ID badge around her neck. She asked calm, specific questions, took notes without looking rushed. I showed her the certified maps, the violation letters, the footage. She asked to keep copies. I gave her everything. "What they did," she said, packing her folder, "is more than trespass. Interfering with property designated for a deployed service member is a federal violation under Title 50. We're going to elevate this." I didn't smile. I didn't nod. I just handed her a copy of Alex's deployment letter and said, "Do what you have to." That weekend, I finally got a call from the sheriff's detective assigned to my case. He'd reviewed the video, identified the SUV, and confirmed the license plate belonged to Karen's husband, the tall guy, a private security contractor with an expired license. The badge he'd been wearing on his belt was decorative, meant to intimidate. But that wasn't the end of it. On Sunday morning, I was hammering a new beam into the porch frame when a car pulled into the driveway. Not the usual HOA fleet. It was a station wagon with a rusted bumper and local news stickers on the rear window. A young woman stepped out with a press badge and a camera bag. "Mr. Grimm," she asked. "I'm Natalie Roy with Channel 7. We've received a tip about a property rights dispute involving a veteran's family. Mind if we talk?" I almost said no. I hated this kind of attention. But then I pictured Karen's smug face as the cops unzipped my son's duffel bag like it might explode. I nodded. "You're recording now?" She set up fast. One camera on a tripod, one mic clipped to my collar. I kept it simple. I explained who I was, who my son was, how long I'd owned the property, and what had happened. I didn't need to dramatize anything. Reality was already doing the heavy lifting. "Do you think this was retaliation?" she asked. "I think HOAs aren't supposed to operate like gangs with clipboards," I said. "And I think if someone touches my son's things again, they'd better bring more than a laminated map and a walkie-talkie." The segment aired that night. I didn't watch it live, but the calls started pouring in anyway. Neighbors, former firefighters, guys from my department I hadn't talked to in years. Everyone had an opinion. Most were outraged. A few asked if I was finally going to sue. I was already ahead of them. My lawyer, Sarah Cross, had been gathering everything for a civil suit: trespassing, harassment, property damage, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. But after the media hit, we took it further. She filed an official complaint with the Missouri Department of Housing and Community Development, citing abuse of power by the Silver Shore HOA and attached footage of the intrusion. Simultaneously, she submitted a referral to the Missouri State Attorney General's office requesting criminal investigation into HOA misconduct and potential fraud. But the big one, the chess move we'd been holding, was filed the next morning. A formal inquiry addressed to the Department of Defense's Office of Service Member Affairs, alleging obstruction and tampering with a residence designated for a returning active duty Marine. Sarah attached photos of the damaged belongings, the cracked photo, the empty duffel, the trespassing footage, and a brief note. This is not an isolated mistake. This was targeted. We believe this HOA acted knowingly and maliciously against a military family. Once that left her desk, it was out of our hands. The day after that, someone slashed the tires on my trailer. I didn't call the police. I replaced the tires, added 2 more trail cams, and set up a pressure alarm under the gravel at the gate. I wasn't just bracing for another attack. I was cataloging it. But the real twist came Friday morning when I went into town for groceries. I was halfway through the checkout line when I saw the headline on the local newspaper stand, "Lakefront HOA under investigation after veterans group raises federal complaint." Right below it, a photo of Karen looking annoyed as hell, shielding her face from the camera with a clipboard. I grabbed 2 copies, one for me, one for Alex. That night, I poured myself a whiskey and sat on the porch as the sun sank into the lake like a hot coal dropping into water. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt ready. The gloves were off. The morning the lawsuit officially hit Karen's doorstep, I was already at the cabin staining the new deck boards. I heard the mailbox clang and saw the courier's car vanish up the drive. A few hours later, my lawyer Sarah called. "It's been served," she said simply, "and we're not the only ones." Turns out 3 other households in Silvershore had filed separate complaints after the news broke, 2 citing harassment for having non-conforming landscaping, and 1 a retired couple who claimed they were fined $800 for leaving their garage door open for more than 10 minutes. Karen had stirred up a hornet's nest, and now people who used to keep quiet were looking around and realizing maybe it wasn't normal to live in fear of receiving a yellow violation slip for owning a red mailbox. HOA headquarters, if you could call it that, was just a room in Karen's house and a Dropbox folder, but it acted like a mini regime, using threats and bylaws like cudgels. Sarah knew that. That's why, beyond our civil suit, she filed a petition for discovery of financial documents. A legal move that would force the HOA to open up their books. We wanted to know how much money had they collected in fines and where had it all gone. At the same time, Sarah added new charges to our suit: slander, retaliatory enforcement, and document falsification. The last one was key. We had hard proof the map they used on me was not recognized by the county, and yet Karen had presented it to police and the press as if it were gospel. That was fraud, period. Karen's legal team responded fast, a local firm known for overcharging and underperforming. They filed a motion to dismiss our case on the grounds that, quote, "The plaintiff is not a recognized HOA member and thus not subject to its actions." Sarah smiled when she read that. "Exactly," she said. "They just admitted the core of our argument, and they think it's a defense." The judge didn't waste time. He denied the motion to dismiss with prejudice, which meant they couldn't refile it later. It also meant this was going to trial. Fast. Meanwhile, the cracks inside the HOA were widening. I started receiving anonymous notes in my mailbox, printed, not handwritten. One of them said, "Thank you. We've been scared for years." Another had photocopies of internal HOA emails, including one where Karen referred to my cabin as a blight on the shoreline and suggested using security patrols to monitor my activities. There was even a line about keeping an eye out for military movement, in case my son came back with unauthorized weapons. I handed everything to Sarah. She nearly choked on her coffee. They're not even trying to be subtle. Public pressure was building. Channel 7 followed up with a second report. A larger regional paper picked it up too, running a headline that read, "Veteran's father accuses HOA of trespass, harassment, fraud. Local officials silent." Silent until now. Late one afternoon, a dusty black SUV rolled into my drive. A man in khakis and a sheriff's department polo stepped out. He introduced himself as Detective Reeves, newly assigned to the case involving Karen's break-in. He asked if I had time to walk him through everything again. I didn't mind. I gave him the full tour, entry points, timeline, the footage, the cracked photo of Alex on the floor. He said the DA's office was now reviewing potential felony charges for criminal trespass and property tampering. As we walked out to his car, he paused. "Just so you know, you're not the only one. We've had a few other complaints trickle in. Looks like someone's empire is starting to wobble. 2 days later, I got a visit from someone I didn't expect. Tom Miller, HOA treasurer. Nervous. Mid-40s, balding. Wearing a shirt that looked one size too big and a conscience 2 sizes too tight. He asked if we could talk. We sat on the porch with beers I didn't offer, but he seemed to need. "I didn't know she went that far," he said, barely meeting my eye. "Karen told us your cabin was annexed last year. She said the paperwork was done." "It wasn't," I said flatly. He rubbed his forehead. "There's no vote on record, no board approval. She just printed the map and said it was final." I let the silence do the heavy lifting. Tom took a long swig and sighed. "I think it's over. Half the board wants out. A few of us are meeting off-site. We might issue a no-confidence letter." I nodded. "You do that. And maybe return the money you took from the Jenkins family while you're at it." His face fell. "You're not the only one who left a trail," I said. By the time he left, I'd added one more name to the list of potential depositions. That night, I sat at my desk and updated the legal file. 74 pages now. Dates, photos, sworn statements, footage, copies of complaints, media coverage, anonymous tips. I scrolled to the bottom and wrote the new title in bold, The Fall of Silver Shore. The courthouse was already buzzing when I arrived. It wasn't even a trial yet, just a pre-hearing to determine whether the civil and criminal claims against the HOA and Karen Dowell would be consolidated. But somehow, every bench in the gallery was full. Residents from Silver Shore, reporters, maybe even a few curious lawyers hoping to see a train wreck in slow motion. Sarah sat beside me at the plaintiff's table, flipping through our stack of exhibits. Across from us, Karen was flanked by 2 attorneys in navy suits and her husband, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. She wore a conservative gray blazer and a tight smile that cracked every time she made eye contact with me. The judge entered, stern, sharp-voiced, the type who didn't care for drama. Perfect. After pleasantries, he dove straight in. "We are here to determine whether the plaintiff's civil case and the ongoing criminal investigation share sufficient overlap to proceed jointly," he said. "We'll hear summary statements first." Karen's lawyer started with polished arrogance. He claimed that this was a misunderstanding, that the HOA had merely acted in the interest of community consistency, and that Mr. Grimm has no standing, as he is not, and never has been, a member of the association in question. When the judge raised an eyebrow, the man doubled down, arguing that even though Randall Grimm's property wasn't technically within the HOA boundary, the spirit of the community applied. Sarah leaned over and whispered, "Did he just say the spirit of the community?" When it was our turn, Sarah stood with the poise of someone who knew she had more ammo than the other side had armor. She began with a calm explanation of the timeline, my ownership, the legal separation from Silver Shore, the trespassing, the forged maps, the property damage. She then laid out the recordings, the documents, and finally, she handed over a packet labeled Exhibit H, the HOA's own communications, anonymously submitted, showing Karen authorizing surveillance on a private citizen and referencing Alex as a potential hazard due to combat status. The courtroom went still. Karen's lawyer asked to review the documents. He flipped through them, whispering furiously. Karen, meanwhile, sat rigid, eyes locked forward, refusing to blink. The judge requested clarification. "Is the defendant claiming these emails are fabricated?" The attorney stammered something about lack of authentication, but the judge cut him off. "We'll verify metadata later. For now, they're entered. Proceed." Then came the footage. Sarah played the night vision video from the second camera, the one that showed Karen, clipboard guy, and their contractor sneaking onto my property at 2 in the morning, entering the cabin, and leaving with Alex's duffel bag. The big guy tossing it into the back of their SUV. Karen's face clearly lit by the infrared. Gasps in the gallery. "Let the record reflect," Sarah said, "that this occurred 3 days after Mr. Grimm laminated his deed and posted it publicly. And 2 weeks before, the HOA claimed he was in violation of occupancy rules." Karen's lawyer asked for a recess. The judge denied it. Instead, the judge called Detective Reeves to the stand. Yes, he'd shown up in court, subpoenaed after we learned Karen had tried to file a restraining order against me just days earlier. Reeves confirmed the ongoing investigation. Then he stated plainly that based on current evidence, criminal charges were being recommended to the district attorney, including trespass, destruction of property, and possible federal interference with the residence of an active duty service member. Karen's facade cracked. Her lips twitched. Her foot tapped violently under the table. The judge turned to the HOA's lawyers. Are you aware your client presented this court with documents contradicting official county plat maps? They hesitated. Yes or no? He snapped. Yes. And did your client verify the boundary adjustment with the county? No, Your Honor. The judge rubbed his temples. At that point, the bailiff whispered something to him, and the judge nodded. Bring them in. Two deputies walked into the courtroom and approached Karen's table. Ms. Dowell, one said, you're under arrest for criminal trespass and presenting fraudulent property documents to law enforcement. Please stand. The room erupted. Reporters bolted for the exits. Karen's husband sat frozen. Her lawyer cursed under his breath. Karen stood slowly, as if still waiting for someone to tell her this was all a prank. As they cuffed her, she turned to me. This is political, she hissed. You think this is over? You're a squatter with a megaphone. I didn't say a word. I just looked at her and then at the judge, who calmly said, Court will reconvene next month to address HOA administrative dissolution hearings. This matter is no longer hypothetical. As Karen was led out of the courtroom, someone in the gallery clapped, then another, then half the room. Even the judge allowed himself the faintest hint of a smile before banging the gavel. The HOA's board collapsed the same afternoon. 3 members resigned. A 4th fled town and disconnected their phone. Emails leaked. Old fines were disputed. A class action suit from the residents was already forming. And me? I drove back to the cabin, parked beside the lake, and stared at the duffel bag we'd recovered, returned to me by the sheriff's office, sealed in evidence tape. I left it unopened on the porch and listened to the water for a while. Justice had finally gotten loud. The silence after the storm was louder than the storm itself. Karen's arrest sent a shockwave through Silver Shore. Within 48 hours, the HOA board collapsed like a termite-ridden shed. 3 of the remaining members resigned via email, one citing deeply regrettable misjudgments, another blaming misinformation from leadership, and the third just wrote, I want nothing more to do with any of this. The 4th board member, a retired orthodontist who once fined a family $500 for having a Halloween skeleton on their roof, passed the allowed holiday window, packed up, and vanished. No one had seen him since the court date. His house went dark. Mail piled up. Rumor had it he was in Idaho with his daughter. Nobody really cared. Meanwhile, Sarah wasted no time. She filed for a court order to dissolve the Silver Shore HOA entirely. With no functioning board, multiple verified abuses of power, and mounting civil complaints, the motion had legs. She also froze the HOA's accounts pending investigation. The court granted it. That alone sent the entire neighborhood into chaos. Dozens of residents now realized they'd been fined, threatened, or harassed under false authority. Old violations were re-examined. One family, the Reynoldses, discovered they'd paid over $6,000 in penalties over 5 years, every one of them illegitimate. Another man learned his shed had been condemned by Karen's fake compliance inspector, who turned out to be her cousin with a badge bought online. I started receiving calls from people I hadn't spoken to since the 90s. Neighbors, parents, veterans, even the former mayor who once tried to buy the land I owned to build a boat launch. Most of them called to thank me. A few called to apologize. Then came the hearings. Not a trial, just administrative review of the HOA's collapse, overseen by a court-appointed auditor named Leonard Cho. Soft-spoken, glasses thick as bottle caps but sharper than any scalpel. Leonard dug through every invoice, every email, every fine issued by the board. His findings came out in a 78-page report titled Systemic Misuse of Authority in a Private Association Structure, the Case of Silver Shore Estates. The report's summary was brutal. HOA leadership acted outside their charter repeatedly. Legal boundaries were ignored, residents were misled, records were falsified. Financial misconduct appears likely. Appears likely? Leonard was being generous. Sarah was already drafting a class action compensation framework with a proposed settlement pool pulled from the HOA's frozen accounts. And that wasn't all. The Missouri State Senate had caught wind of the situation. One of the veteran advocacy groups we contacted early on had sent the footage and court transcripts directly to Senator Charles Dean's office. Within a week, he introduced a bill titled the Grimm Amendment, a proposal requiring that no HOA may assert jurisdiction over any land not explicitly incorporated in their founding charter, regardless of proximity, unless signed by the property owner. The thing passed through committee like wildfire. I watched it live on a cheap laptop at the diner, eating overcooked hash browns, feeling like someone had just renamed a street after my son. It wasn't about me, but it felt like it was for people like us. Back home, the cabin was peaceful again. The cameras were still up, but I hadn't had a single trespass alert in weeks. I repainted the porch, rehung Alex's photos, restored his cracked frame. I even rebuilt the old bench swing my wife used to love and bolted it into place under the oak tree. One afternoon, I heard footsteps approaching. Not law enforcement, not reporters. It was Tom Miller, the ex-treasurer, holding a box in his hands. "I believe this belongs to you," he said, setting it on the porch rail. Inside was the HOA's physical archive, minutes, forms, receipts, the laminated, adjusted map Karen had waved like scripture. "It's all there," he said. "Whatever you don't use in court, burn it." He started to leave, then stopped. "I'm sorry," he said. I looked at him for a long second. "You knew better." He nodded once quietly and walked away. That night, I poured a whiskey, walked down to the dock, and burned the map. The gravel crunched under the tires the same way it always had, but this time it felt different, familiar, final. The sun was barely up when I saw the dark green rental SUV roll around the bend, kicking up a soft plume of dust behind it. The passenger window rolled down first, and there he was, Alex, in uniform, in one piece, home. I stepped off the porch before the engine was off. He opened the door and stood there for a second, scanning the lake like he was seeing it for the first time. Then he looked at me and smiled. "Looks the same," he said. "Not exactly," I replied. He dropped his duffel bag by the stairs and pulled me into a tight hug. My kid, now a man with medals, scars, and eyes that had seen more than they should have. I'd waited a year for that moment, maybe longer. We sat on the porch with coffee in our hands and silence between us, the good kind. He glanced around, the new beams, the security lights, the freshly sanded swing, and raised an eyebrow. "You did some work." I sipped my coffee. "Had a few uninvited guests while you were gone." He nodded slowly. "Heard something about it. My CO called me in Kuwait. Said the Department of Defense had my name flagged in a civilian harassment case. Thought I'd gotten into trouble." I chuckled. "Not you. Just your old man. Turns out HOA presidents don't like being told no by landowners." He leaned back and looked out at the lake. "You handled it?" "Oh yeah. Court ruled in our favor. HOA's gone. Karen's going somewhere less scenic for a few years. Might get to plant flowers in a federal courtyard. Who knows?" He smiled at that. "Damn. Also," I added, "they passed a law. A real one. You can't be roped into a neighborhood group unless you signed up for it. Named it after us." Alex blinked. "Wait, what?" I handed him the newspaper. Front page. Grimm Amendment signed into law. Missouri tightens HOA boundary regulations after landmark case. A photo of me at the Capitol hearing sat just below the headline, looking like I'd rather be anywhere else, which, to be fair, I had. He stared at the page in silence for a moment, then just shook his head. "You went full dad crusade." I shrugged. "You serve overseas, I serve subpoenas." We laughed. First time in a while. Real laughter from the gut. That afternoon, we went through the cabin room, by room. I showed him the shelf I built for his medals, the photos I had restored, even the damn punching bag, rehung and ready, swinging gently in the breeze under the back overhang. He didn't say much, just took it all in. But I saw it in his face. The relief, the recognition, the weight finally shifting off his shoulders. At sundown, we walked down to the dock. I brought the sign I had made, wrapped in canvas and bound with twine. Together, we mounted it between two cedar posts we'd planted years ago during one of his first fishing trips. The sign read, "Private land residents of U.S. Marine veteran protected by federal law trespassers will be remembered." He read it twice, then looked at me. That last line, I grinned, Figured it was classier than shot on sight. He laughed again. Perfect. We stood in silence as the sky dimmed, the water like glass, reflecting a house that was finally, undeniably ours again. Later that week, the town paper ran a final follow-up. The HOA was officially dissolved. Karen had been sentenced to 2 years for criminal trespass and forgery, plus probation for obstruction. Her husband divorced her before sentencing. Residents of Silver Shore voted to form a new community association, voluntary this time, and named it Cedar Shore. No board, no bylaws, just a group text. As for me, I got invited to speak at a veterans' rights panel in D.C. I politely declined, told them I had a deck to finish and a son to catch up with. Some battles you fight overseas, some happen in your own backyard. Either way, you stand your ground. And when it's over, you swing gently in the breeze and watch the lake shine.